reminded when I come out to the country, come out to North Dakota. And some people are a little bit hesitant about listening to folks from Washington. So it reminds me of what Ronald Reagan said, and I'm paraphrasing. The 8 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from Washington, I'm here to help." That's probably the best I can do, Anyway, we have tried to be helpful, certainly across the board. And I think it's been a really good last couple of years for the grain growers. I've been happy to represent them in Washington, D.C. on a variety of issues. So we've got a new federal crop insurance program, separate enterprise units for spring wheat and durum. And that was a program on which they and the U.S. durum growers and others have been working for several years. And we were able to put it over the top. It was a big deal. I used to work in the risk management agency, and we were able to get that through, working with and through congressional offices too. We had a lot of assistance and support, and that was a happy achievement for us. And it's effective for the 2022 crop year. Coverage for spring wheat under the initial coronavirus food assistance program last year, and working again through the delegation, particularly Senator Hovind. Spring wheat was covered. Winter wheat was not initially. So we were fortunate that winter wheat was added. We're happy about that. Local market price inclusion for the malting barley investment under federal crop insurance. We were able to secure that again working with the U.S. Management Agency. That was a great development for barley. Passage of the grain standards reauthorization is something we worked on actively. Initial changes to ACE 2A and laying groundwork for more. So that's the worker program. Folks coming from other countries in North Dakota, particularly we have workers from South Africa. And I went to folks, some in this room and others have talked to me about that, wanting to see some relief, some assistance in that regard, maybe extending the periods that folks can stay because it's so hard to get workers. And so we're working with the administration and Congress to try to make that happen. I'm a member of a lot of different coalitions and organizations, including the U.S. Food and Ag Trade Dialogue. And they have a lot of subgroups. So they have ones on China, they have ones on EU, they have ones on USMCA. So I'm active with that organization. And oftentimes we're only state group that's in the room. So we have national organizations, agribusinesses, we have major food companies, and we're sitting at the table as well. Get to hear from administration and congressional speakers. And it's a tremendous insight, I think, for us to have that information coming, trying to stay current on the issues. Preventive planting, able to move up the harvest date so we can hay and bale and chop crops and take preventive planting and not have any penalty. It used to be had to wait till November 1, but it didn't work for those who were in Dakota. Again, that was an issue we worked on for many years, and that is effective. Will be permanent in 2022. We've been able to sign on to a lot of letters. A lot of letters in D.C. are only for national organizations, but lately we've been able to get on, including on USMCA, EU trade, conservation, and crop insurance, and a member of the Crop Insurance Coalition. So we're able to get on these letters and a variety of subjects. Again, it could be trade, could be specifically crop insurance issue or matter. Could be administration appointee whom we're weighing in or supportive of in a letter to the president and other officials. Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, also a member of that. And Rural Investment to Protect Our Environment. The steering committee member is Ed Kessel, and I'm the staff representative, Jamie Powers, who is instrumental in staffing that organization here in the room. So we work closely with them. We feel it's good to be at the table on climate policy, because climate policy really is the #1 priority for the Biden administration. It's their top issue. And it's going to be a big discussion in the next farm bill. It's already being talked about at USDA, so we feel in order to have influence, we have to be on the table. We're not necessarily advocating anything specific. We're being asked to provide our expertise and feedback. I've been involved with Crop Life America for many years because I worked with the registrants representing them on a number of pesticide-related issues. And I think because of that, we were able to get on the Food and Beverage Committee, North Dakota Grain Growers Association, and that includes corporations and national associations. And that discusses a lot of pesticide-related issues too, and provides updates on federal matters and regulations, including MRLs, maximum residue levels, particularly as they relate to products being exported from the United States to Europe. Also a member of the DC Ag East Tax Coalition. That's a recent one that I joined. The Ag Workforce Coalition that I already mentioned, H2A, and the Crop Insurance Coalition, which I also already mentioned. We joined the Pesticide Policy Coalition, the premier group of national, state, and regional commodity groups, and virtually all the registrants are part of that entity, and we meet about once a month. We've been meeting virtually, of course, and we'll have oftentimes administration or congressional speaker be part of that session. Again, it's a good opportunity to hear from folks about some of the challenges that we face with EPA, particularly on the Endangered Species Act, and how that relates to the approvals of pesticides. Improving our visibility or having a multiplying effect on our efforts by doing this, I think by participating in all these groups, signing on to letters. And in 2021, some of the big issues have been tax, stepped-up basis, and estate taxes have not been changed in the Build Back Better Act that we've all been hearing about and working on for many months, which is now in the Senate. And Leader Schumer has indicated that he wants to get that done by Christmas. The House has already passed it, but there's nothing in the House version having to do with any changes to stepped-up basis or to the estate tax. Two critical issues, obviously, for producers. But still, tax provisions of concern could reemerge, and we need to remain vigilant because the Senate will do its thing and may look for sources of revenue. Working with like-minded groups to participate in coalitions and seeking bipartisan support. And then challenges for us are clearly going to be burdensome regulations. Better. On the environment, conservation, water. So Lotus is a big deal. I just was talking to Callan, his attorney, North Dakota Grain Growers, and he's done a lot of analysis on Lotus. So we'll be speaking with him. There's a pre-publication rule on that. It looks like they're going to be going back as it relates to the Prairie, Prairie pothole region. They're going to be going back to the 2015 Obama administration rule. And the challenge is staying ahead of new developments. And I'm flipping ahead here accidentally, but anyway, how do I go back? Okay, so we'll just go to elections. Virginia and New Jersey were markers, I think, for what could happen next year. We had a situation in Virginia where Glenn Youngkin is the governor-elect, and he defeated Terry McAuliffe, who had been governor of Virginia. You can't serve more than one term, you can't serve 2 consecutive terms. So he had been governor 2 terms ago, was governor, and then he ran again. So sort of an incumbent. National ties, kind of nationalized the election. It really was about state and local issues, and Youngkin ran a really effective campaign. It resonated. I think President Biden's low approval rating was impactful in that race. It certainly could be in 2022. There was a state where the president won by 10 points, and Youngkin won by a little less than 2. New Jersey, the president had won that by 16, and Phil Murphy defeated his Republican challenger by, I think it was like 1 percentage point. It was really, really close. So what does that mean for the House next year? Most experts will tell you likely the Republicans are going to retake the House. It's 11 months away. So much can happen. The president's approval rate can go up. Some of this COVID can get behind us. The ag shipping crisis, maybe that's partially resolved. And these are all significant challenges. Inflation could be around for a while, but if it's not, maybe it works better for Democrats. But more Democrats in the House have retired than have Republicans. So that's usually a harbinger of things to come. The Senate, maybe a coin flip at this point. It's also possible that the Republicans could take the Senate as well. So historically, that's been the case. First election of a president's first term, midterm elections, oftentimes the party in power President's Party loses seats. And it'll be even more difficult to implement the President's agenda. So, with this year and next, trade, crop insurance, wetlands mitigation banking, and there's a panel on that now as we speak. Certainly protection against budget cuts, and we're all trying to be vigilant about that. Crop insurance and other programs. Further ag funding, WIP Plus, consider Hope and others were instrumental in getting that in the continuing resolution, which we're operating under now, $10 billion in additional funding, and that would include coverage of crops that were ready for the land damage. So that was good given the drought situation we have in North Dakota. Research, very important. And we'll continue developing relationships with the administration, Congress, working with Senate and House ag leaders, Democrats, Republicans. I think Senator Hogan's been very smart in terms of his outreach because, and I'm channeling related to this, he's reached across the aisle, he's working closely with Senator Bozeman, the ranking Republican on the Senate Ag Committee. He's also working closely with Debbie Stabenow. He's working with somebody from Arkansas. He's also working with somebody from Michigan, Democratic leaders. So I think that's very important in terms of building these coalitions. And we'll continue to seek opportunities for further engagement, leadership in D.C., working with coalitions in North Dakota, and I think Minnesota too. I mean, we do reach out on occasion to Senators Klobuchar and Smith, both members of the Senate Ag Committee. And so it's important for us to expand out the relationships that we have with our national organizations, and then positioning for the next Farm Bill. And big thank you to our delegation, Senators Hogan and Kramer and Kelly Armstrong, for their accessibility. Their staff is always available. We talk to them frequently. New dialogue opportunities. I'm grateful for the relationships and work with Tom Bernhardt, Ed Kessel, and Dan Westlin. We're able to move quickly when we need to and get responses and get our name in there, our letters and what have you. So the ongoing challenges, budgetary pressures, polarization between and within the parties. We see the polarization within parties, Republicans and Democrats fighting amongst one another. And then, of course, between the parties, misinformation about agriculture. That was talked about the speaker last night. That's a big deal. You know that. NGOs, environmental groups, they pose significant challenges, particularly in the pesticide arena, but in other areas as well, impacting agriculture. I sketched out some Farm Bill priorities for 2023. These are sort of general thoughts that I have. I think really Minnesota, North Dakota, others are going to have real specific ideas about what you want to do. And that's going to be helpful to us. I thought it'd be good to put something down on paper and work with Dan Watson on this, ARC and PLC, and ensure they work for producers. Crop insurance, maintain and strengthen. Don't jeopardize ag funding, strengthen CCC because it's capped right now at a certain level. Conservation policy, make sure it is voluntary, and the same with climate policy. Of course, the big other, what else is it that we want to come together on these issues? We work internally, we work with other state groups, we work with national organizations. And then we go to the Congress. Here are 2 or 3 or 4 big ideas that we would like. We try to do that early rather than later, because that's going to be critical. Make sure that more is in the water, so to speak, and our issues are being considered. I think that's the effective way for us to achieve our objectives. With that, I will turn it over to Jake Westlin.
Can you hear me back there? Good, good. My name is Jake Westlin with the National Association of Wheat Growers, and as Jim mentioned earlier, I actually worked for Senator Heidi Heitkamp during her 6 years in the United States Senate. I'm originally from Minnesota, but I came to North Dakota by way of attending the University of North Dakota, so it's good to be back here in Grand Forks, my old stomping grounds. It's great to kind of see a lot of growers who I haven't had the opportunity to see in a while, reconnecting with faces, or reconnecting with folks and seeing some friendly faces and just being back in the state. And I've been with the National Association of Wheat Growers for just over 2 years now. In between my stint working for Senator Heitkamp and coming to Nog, I spent several months, about 6 months or so, working for corporate state partners in Washington, D.C., doing policy and research and analysis. So as you know from Jim's presentation, we're here to talk a little bit about, give an update on kind of what happened in 2021, federal policy update, and also talk about what are some of the ongoing challenges in terms of process and policy making in Washington, D.C., and what's the outlook for next year, 2022, for the second half of the 117th Congress and going into Farm Bill reauthorization. So just here's a few things that we're touching on today a little bit. Obviously, I just mentioned looking at what's on the horizon for next year, looking at Farm Bill priorities, kind of some emergency challenges as well. So just kind of looking back at 2021, we kicked off the year with a new Congress, right? So we had we had a new administration come in, and a new Senate flipped from Republican control to Democratic control, very evenly split, tenuous. So very slim majority there, slimmest of majorities there. So a lot of some differing priorities, obviously, in shifting from a new administration, a lot of new education, a lot of new meeting with Hill folks, meeting with folks at USDA as well, trying to educate them about some of the challenges that are ongoing in the country, because there are a lot of new staffing changes, particularly when we were looking at the House and Senate Agriculture Committee, where there were 3 of the 4 principals are new there. Obviously, a lot of oxygen has been sucked up last year and this year as well, related to the pandemic. So there's we saw 5 different COVID packages move through in 2020. In 2021, we saw the American Rescue Plan get enacted in March, which was a significant piece of legislation, one of President Biden's campaign promises, right? Looking back there. And other major legislative issues that have been ongoing and ongoing in 2021. And continue to go on. Obviously, we saw infrastructure that was signed into law just last month, so they'll be implementing things there as well. Reconciliation, as Jim mentioned, is continuing to be debated in the United States Senate. And then, obviously, we are operating under the second continuing resolution for FY 2022. There hasn't been a full fiscal year 2022 appropriations bill yet signed into law, so there was one that had that Bill Plus component signed into law at the end of September. And then we just saw another extension of the continuing resolution that extends federal funding to mid-February. So I mentioned this a moment ago. We have 3 of the 4 new principals on the House and Senate Ag Committee are new. Obviously, we have Senator Debbie Stabenow, a familiar face, certainly understands a lot of our issues. She's back in the driver's seat in the Senate Agriculture Committee. She's regaining the gavel after Senator Roberts retired and the Senate flipped to Democrat control. On the ranking member side, Senator Bozer from Arkansas, he's a new face on the committee, in leadership anyway. On the House side, we have Chairman Scott with the House Agriculture Committee. We saw he is new to assuming the gavel, and then also G.T. Thompson is new in that position as well. So we've taken throughout the year, early in the year, we had our virtual Hill visits because, it is the pandemic, so Hill offices have been difficult to get into. It still remains a challenge to get to the Hill, but you do have a lot of Zoom meetings with them, but you are able to get there now. It is a little bit more difficult, but early in the year we had our virtual Hill days, so we met with over 50, 60 offices, and we also set up meetings with our growers to kind of get in and have face-to-face interactions with the new staff there. So we brought before not when we had our virtual Hill visits, we set up meetings with the Senate majority and minority staff, and then we went and had in the afternoon, we had meetings with the House majority and minority staff as well. So we were able to get our folks acquainted with those new staffers as the committees continue to step up there. And looking at down the street, looking at the Whitten Building and at 1600 Pennsylvania, or at the White House, we have obviously new administration, so a lot of new faces there. Obviously, Secretary Vilsack is a known commodity in the agriculture business, having previously served in this role under President Obama. But when looking at the nominations, it's certainly lagging in getting those either named or passed through the Senate. Obviously, looking at the state directors, there's been a dozen or so that have been rolled out. There's certainly a lot of room there to get those named. We are also working with our colleagues throughout the industry to continue to educate and kind of push the Senate when there are qualified candidates. we mentioned letters a lot. We've been signing lots of letters kind of urging that qualified candidates see their nominations advance quickly and timely, because it is important to have these folks in positions where we can engage with them to represent wheat growers and to continue to press concerns that we are in, because it is important that the president have his people in place so they can execute the policies, and that we have faces and people there to interact with who are able to provide responses and do act and take action. We had a number of nominations in the trade space recently rolled out in September, only in Toronto for a negotiator, but we also are still looking at USDA. We still have not yet put forward an FAS administrator as well. This next chart just kind of shows kind of a visualization of progression in getting set in for positions into power. It's about on track with where President Trump was, but certainly the partisan rancor is, increased, which leads to a decrease in getting your nominations through. There's a lot of congressional holds, a lot of paperwork that needs to get applied or get sent to the Hill and get these nominations through. So it just kind of gives a little visualization of that process. And I mentioned, and Jim mentioned as well, WIP Plus. So the continuing resolution that was enacted in the end of September included $10 billion for a disaster assistance. A good chunk of that is for WIP Plus in 2020 and 2021. Earlier this summer, the House Agriculture Committee, they held a hearing and markup on a legislative piece to reauthorize WIP Plus for these 2 calendar years. It's based off of similar WIP Plus program that was rolled out for 18 and 19. And then the Senate also put a piece in their aid appropriations bill that included a funding component for that. The House, they wanted to have, they're the authorizers of that program, so they wanted to have kind of put their stamp on it, but it was, at that point, it needed a funding piece as well. But then these kind of got married together in that continuing resolution that was enacted. So right now, this is kind of really in a regulatory limbo, not limbo, but it's facing some, it's at USDA right now for implementation. USDA has started to have some stakeholder meetings. We participated in one a few weeks ago, providing feedback about some of the challenges and issues that were experienced by wheat growers and the WIP Plus when it was rolled out in 2018, 2019. There were a lot of issues that we're aware of that we will continue to convey to USDA as they seek to implement this. There could be some, one of the statutory changes that were included within the CR was the drought component. Under the previous WIP Plus, you had to be in the D3 category. This kind of lowered that threshold a little bit, where you can be in the D2 category for 8 weeks to be qualified for these programs. So that is one new flexibility that was afforded to this program. So this map kind of shows a little bit about, it's the drought monitor from yesterday, or the second, and obviously the red here is that D2 or higher. The orange is kind of hard to tell, but the darker shade of orange is that D2. Obviously it doesn't tell you much is in D2 for 8 weeks, but this just gives you kind of a general idea of where the drought is ongoing, and obviously it's been a huge concern for a lot of growers in this region, Montana and the PNW as well. We talked a little bit about some of the major legislative things that have been ongoing this year and been taking up a lot of bandwidth on Capitol Hill. Infrastructure is being one of them. So the American Jobs Act was recently signed into law on November 15. That includes a significant component, $1.2 trillion for infrastructure. Had a bipartisan support in the Senate, and it had fairly bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. There were some Democrats who detracted on that, some of the very progressive components of the caucus, but there was a number of Republicans that came along to help that legislation pass and ultimately get signed into law. And this next chart here kind of shows a breakdown of over here you have the physical transportation component. You have your roads, bridges, major projects. You have your waterways and airports over here, $42 billion for that. So a lot of the airports here in North Dakota and elsewhere. And also, when talking about waterways, there's a lot of locks and dams that are in either deferred maintenance in the Mississippi River. Rely heavily, ag transportation relies heavily on the locks and dams to get barges from up here, High Plains, Minnesota, down to New Orleans and further south out of the Gulf. So that is to help kind of, provide that funding to help rehabilitate a lot of these projects that are really have been working on shoestring budgets for a number of years to help maintain those, to maintain our competitive edge in the global marketplace as well, to help get your goods and products overseas to help with the export. On this other side, looking over here, this is kind of core infrastructure, like looking at broadband, talking about grid resiliency. And I know that with Texas saw some challenges with having a severe cold last year, so there's a lot of grid issues there. So this is kind of thinking that there needs to be upgrades to our grid. So that's kind of where this is, where that's at. And we mentioned a reconciliation of the Build Back Better Act a little bit. So one of the major, and the reconciliation, just to kind of 101, it's a tool that's used to help bypass the Senate filibuster so this can pass on an easier vote. 51 senators needed to support our simple majority, whereas you otherwise need to get 60 votes to overcome that filibuster threshold. So going back, the House of Representatives, they held a number of markups on this, about almost $4 trillion component in September. This was revised downward in October with an agreement to kind of bring along, Manchin and Sinema, who are moderate Democrats in the Senate, who were uncomfortable with that larger figure, to somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.75 trillion. So one of the things that we've been looking at NOG is we were significantly concerned about the tax implications that were originally kind of thrown out there early when this was first rolled out by the Biden administration. There was talk about eliminating stepped-up bases, as was mentioned earlier. So one of the things that we did there was we brought some folks from the White House before our board of directors to kind of brief us on why these changes and how they, because one of their talking points was that this would only impact 2% of farmers, and we had significant concerns, and we did not necessarily agree with their arithmetic there. So we wanted to bring before NOG some of their senior staff there at the White House and staff of the National Economic Council to kind of brief us, and so we could also provide feedback to them about what our concerns were and questions about how this would impact different farm structures, and also reinforce that this is a huge concern for us, and these changes to the tax code would be detrimental to farming in rural America. So we brought them before us, and then following that, we also launched a letter writing campaign where we've contacted 77 congressional offices, almost 600 letters sent in by wheat growers from across the country, outlining their concerns with the changes to stepped-up bases that were included earlier this year, or talked about earlier this year, which were not mentioned, or were not included, as Jim mentioned, in the House-passed bill. So we were pretty successful there, and obviously remaining vigilant. We have this letter writing campaign. It's continuing as this continues being debated in the Senate. So this is something that's still up in the air. And the Build Back Better Act also includes some significant dollars for agriculture as well. There's about $2 billion for ag research, about $28 billion for conservation programs as well, which is kind of spread across EQIP, CSP, and RCCP, and some other programs as well. Obviously, with the new administration, climate has been front and center. This is a picture from a House Agriculture Committee hearing in September on voluntary carbon markets. President Dave Milligan was the only farmer present on that panel providing testimony, and obviously there's a lot of questions. So he got a lot of questions about how these programs are being implemented, and obviously President Milligan was being the only farmer there received, I think, probably of any of his witnesses, the most questions of any witnesses, and a pretty good number all around. So, I mean, President Milligan's key point was just kind of stressing that these need to be voluntary carbon markets, that there needs to be, we oppose any mandatory conservation requirements for participating in crop insurance and USDA programs. So just really kind of trying to provide constructive feedback to some of the questions that were thrown out there, and just making sure that these recognize the regional differences that the farming practices throughout the country, that early adopters also need to be included in kind of consideration in any of these programs. And also we launched a special climate sustainability committee back in April, and we've had about 9 or so meetings throughout the summer, meeting with folks from the Hill trying to flush out our policy and also to provide feedback, because obviously with the change in Congress, with the change in administration, there are lots of questions that are being had, and this is a conversation that is happening, whether or not folks agree with climate change, or if this is, if there's human elements to climate change. This is a conversation that's happened. This is something that the government that is currently in power is proceeding with regardless. And obviously there's a number of economic conditions facing our country this year. I just want to kind of talk about a couple of these. Yields and production were down this year, a lot of because of the drought, but also a lot of low wheat stocks as well. You can kind of tell here, on-farm, off-farm down significantly, and wheat prices as well, and a lot of competition from other wheat producing countries as well. Other economic conditions, supply chain, obviously something we've been hearing about a lot this year. Pandemic, hurricane related, there's a lot of things going on here. So obviously this is something we have a survey out with our membership right now, trying to get a better understanding of the local and regional issues that are kind of impacting supply chains, because we have been getting lots of questions from Capitol Hill. There have been several hearings on the Hill trying to provide feedback to, and also letters that we've been sending through the ACEO Council to President Biden, to Secretary Vilsack, and Secretary Buttigieg, and we also recently signed on to public comment there with DOT, because there is that supply chain task force that the President put forward, and trying to provide constructive feedback to get help resolve this issue. Obviously, some other ongoing issues. BOTUS we had a revised definition put out on Tuesday, which is open for a 60-day comment period, and we will be looking at that, taking a look at that policy, and providing comment as necessary. Also, EPA is working on new BOTUS regulations. It's expected next year as well. This one kind of goes back to that earlier one, which is a order, and go back to that 2015 rule. And then they're looking at a more durable rule post that as well. And continue to work on pesticides as well through a lot of the similar coalitions that Jim mentioned as well, in the policy, the pesticide coalition, and providing feedback there. Also, rail mergers. This is something we saw Kansas City Southern going forward with the merger with CP. So this is before the STB, and we expect that rulemaking to kind of be finalized early next year. So we're looking at this as something we're looking at and working closely with USB Associates to kind of provide meaningful public comment on as this works its way through the STB. And it's just kind of like a nice little map about that rail network. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns about Canadian meat and how that could be brought in as well. Looking ahead, looking long-term farm bill, that's set to expire September 30th, 2023. So a number of potential outcomes there in terms of short-term extension, reauthorization, but there's a lot of questions about how, with the elections and how that could be renewed. Currently, NOG, we're working through identifying our top 10 farm bill priorities as we get forward in this process, and we are working with our committees to kind of dig deep in the policy to help make informed decisions and kind of better understand what worked, what didn't work, what changes need to be undertook as we look at this reauthorization in 2023 to provide help deliver those. So we are working through that with the committee process, working with the other national organizations in Washington, D.C. on coordinated strategy to help protect our interests of growers. And then also working with our champion at Capitol Hill to identify areas and their areas of interest and kind of laying out marker bills ahead of the Farm Bill. Obviously, a number of challenges we could be facing as we go through the Farm Bill process, and these political dynamics. How climate change, how does that impact the Farm Bill negotiations, and then external threats as well, looking at attacks from the far right, far left, and the far right. And then one last thing, just kind of wanted to show, illustrate, this is the point that Jim was making earlier, that obviously going into the election year, the party empowered in the presidency typically loses. This is the map of the Senate seats that are up. Got a lot of Republicans, less Democrats, but obviously there are Democrats in fairly red states and Democrats Republican, some purple states. So there's going to be a lot of high-profile races this year, and lots of money being spent. But looking across on the House side, obviously every House member is up each and every year. There's also a redistricting year, and Republican legislatures control obviously about 187 districts that can be drawn. Democrats control about 75, and then the rest are split between governments that are legislatures that are one House, one Senate, like in Minnesota, right? The Senate's controlled by Republicans, and the House is controlled by Democrats there, or there are independent commissions as well. So this is just another dynamic that goes in, and it's a very tenuous majority in both chambers for the Democrats. So that's just something to think about as we go into a farm bill year. Obviously, if the president was both, that's a different dynamic that he has to work with in kind of negotiating farm bill. So with that, that's kind of what we're kind of looking at long term here, and I think that wraps up mine. I know we got a few minutes left before the end, and I think I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are for both Jim and myself. And thank you so much for sitting in with us. Yeah, in the back.
So Jacob, earlier you talked about delays in appointments. Minnesota's a perfect example. FSA, our prior committee was done in April or May, I believe. We haven't had a committee since. This has got to be unprecedented that almost a year later we don't have committees in place. Is it some of it COVID related, or is it just coincidental that this is happening? Or?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily COVID related. I know that there is a lot of paperwork that goes into that is involved. There's a lot of vetting, and a lot of the nominations, obviously all the cabinet, the highest profile ones, those were all rolled out in December, right? But obviously the lower ones, those have been a long time coming. But one of the things that a lot of folks can do on the ground in states to help kind of ease those along is work with so that it's a Democrat administration, so working with your senior Democrats in Congress to help, they're the ones who help provide recommendations to the president to help get those nominations, your state FSA directors, and those other statewide appointees, help get them appointed so you can work with your delegations a little bit to help move that and nudge that along. If there are people that you know that are affiliated with the President Powers Party, those are folks that can be put forward as names as well. But it is something we've been tracking and hearing a lot about because those are positions we need in place to help make decisions on the ground there.
I would add that I think there's only one committee member in North Dakota, so similar situation, no state director yet for FSA. It's a concern we've definitely expressed. Our concerns, working with the delegation to get that message to the administration. I think it's somewhat unprecedented for it to be this late for limited rural development and then very limited on the FSA state level directors. And recently appointed an RMA administrator, and that wasn't necessarily too much of a delay. Past administrations, I think it's even been longer than 11 months. But that obviously is a position. Before that, they appointed an FSA administrator 2 months before they were back. But yeah, in terms of filling out those other positions, it's a problem.
Jim, this might be more for you, but excuse me, have you heard or seen much pressure in D.C. on the Chinese to meet their trade one phase obligations or the phase one trade obligations that they've made, and how much work are we doing in pushing phase 2 and moving ahead with those?
Yeah, they haven't, as you know, they haven't met fully phase 1 obligations. They're pretty far behind. On the other hand, exports, all are short, absolutely. Exports will be back, I think, with record levels this year. And that's most of all reason for that is because of China, given what happened in 20 and before. The trade back and forth, the trade rules between our country and there, but their country. But I always kind of myself felt it was going to be market driven in terms of what China would do. They wouldn't be the demand unless it made sense for them from a market standpoint, from a business standpoint. And so I I don't necessarily think they're not going to meet. They're not going to meet this phase one objectives, unfortunately. And then, in concert with that, this administration has only recently come out with its China policy, right? How it's going to address China, but it really, in my opinion, is incomplete. It hasn't quite spelled out exactly how it's going to work in China and what phase two is going to be. I'm sorry, you're going to ask another question.
Certainly, you've heard from Prairie, we're putting a delegation about CRP and hay grazing this past summer in North Dakota. There are all things going on. Further community changes in the future. CRP hay, sorry. The ability to hay CRP. I know Secretary Vilsack had to his feet this summer in allowing opening up or moving up the peak that we can hay CRP. What can we do there to try to push that along? We have disaster routes like this.
Right, to make it permanent, that's going to be tricky. It's going to be a very difficult process to get that done and make it. I think what you're saying is to try to expand it.
Well, maybe
Compound.
Yeah.
We're going to need to come together on that. I mean, we have so many issues we're working on. That's
One of the things to me was when you're in an exceptional D4, D5 drought, and you can only hay 50% of the CRP. That's taking the shorts.
That's not.
It's really tough. But the Western 2/3 of North Dakota was desperate.
Well, if I can add a little bit to that. If you, I think it was the ag commissioner, and I don't know, I should be specific in who I heard this from. I know what you're saying. You got all this feed that could be harvested in a timely manner. And this happened at a roundtable band where everyone was advocating we got to get this hay cut by a certain date because if you don't, all of a sudden it gets dry. And all the fire departments are out trying to put out a fire because they're making hay and it's too dry. And we were basically, what I got from that question was, this happened a time or two before they did move it up. I don't know what the time and what the dates were, they got moved up. And they worked with the wildlife. They moved it up once and they basically said, don't ask again. Isn't that something?
Well, then that, to me, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem. When you put,
Wildlife ahead. Well, we can.
I know, it's soft, but when you hear that, it's like, that's, they got power. And that's what we have to do. That's what we have to, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah, I'm fully aware. Yeah, there's got to be some sort of inroad that we can make.
Yeah.
There's some.
I'm glad you raised it. Jim, did you have anything to say?
One last question is WIP plus payments.
Yep.
Since they were approved or passed, when will those be made?
We don't know. Sarah Holmes met with Secretary Vilsack, called, and there was no indication of the timing is. I'm so glad you raised it because I wanted to also talk briefly, real quickly, about the sprinkler price and harvest price issue. Obviously, we'd like the higher of, because that's how it was done on the previous WIP. There's a higher of every major commodity now. The higher of is the harvest price this year, right? And USDA has made a commitment on that because it obviously would be more expensive to do a harvest price. They haven't made a commitment, and they're also deciding that they need to write a rule on this proposed rule, open it for comment here. So that's the face of it.
Yeah, we were on a stakeholder call with the state administrator a few weeks back, and yeah, exactly. They don't have a clear sense of timing. It's certainly not going to be this year. It's going to be probably maybe the end of Q1, Q2 of next year, and it can either be a rule or a NOFA process, which is a little bit shorter, but it's still a long process in and of itself. So they are looking at the regulations that were promulgated under President Trump and the changes that were mandated under the CR as well. So they're trying to combine all that, make this, and also take lessons learned from the past program to kind of help improve this deliverability and for growers.